He owned the city skyline, but he couldn't stand the sight of his own wife. Alistair Blackwood, a titan of industry, saw Eleanor as nothing more than a necessary but deeply embarrassing part of a business merger. He called her plain a ghost in his gilded mansion, a wallflower he actively hid from the public eye. But a ghost can still hear. And after one final crushing insult, Eleanor decided the wallflower was about to bloom. She embarked on a secret transformation, preparing for one single night, the Metropolis Charity Gala, to show her husband and the world exactly who they had underestimated. Alistair Blackwood didn't marry a woman. He'd acquired a final critical asset. Eleanor Vance was the biological key to the successful merger between Blackwood Industries and Vance Pharmaceuticals, a deal brokered by their fathers on a golf course years before either of them had a say in the matter. The agreement was ironclad. The union of their companies would be sealed by the union of their children. Alistair got controlling shares of a pharmaceutical empire, and Eleanor got the Blackwood name and a cage, albeit a gilded one. The penthouse on Park Avenue was less a home and more a museum of Alistair's success. It was a cold expanse of marble, glass, and steel, with panoramic views of a city that worshipped him. And in this sprawling testament to his power, Eleanor was the ghost. She was quiet, unobtrusive, and in Alistair's cutting opinion, painfully plain. She had intelligent hazel eyes that saw everything, but she kept them downcast. Her mousy brown hair was often pulled back in a simple severe bun, and her wardrobe consisted of a rotation of beige-grey and navy cardigans and sensible skirts that seemed designed to make her fade into the expensive wallpaper. Alistair was a man carved from ambition and arrogance, with sharp, dark features, a physique honed by personal trainers, and a collection of Savile Row suits. He commanded attention wherever he went. He thrived in the spotlight, his name a constant presence in the pages of Forbes and Vogue. His wife, however, was his secret shame. In the 3 years of their marriage, he had never willingly taken her to a major public event. On the rare occasions her presence was unavoidable, he would introduce her with a dismissive wave of his hand. "This is Eleanor," before immediately turning his attention to someone more important, more beautiful, more interesting. The mockery wasn't always so public. More often, it was a daily series of small, sharp cuts. "For God's sake, Eleanor, are you wearing that again?" He'd sneer as she came down for breakfast, her simple grey dress a stark contrast to his immaculate Tom Ford suit. "You have a black card with no limit. Try to look like you're married to me, not my bookkeeper." She would just murmur a quiet, "I'm comfortable, Alistair," which only seemed to infuriate him further. "Comfort is the luxury of people who don't have to be looked at," he'd retort, not even glancing up from his tablet. His cruelty was casual, a thoughtless byproduct of his immense ego. He never considered her feelings, because to him, she was not a complete person. She was a contractual obligation, a piece of living furniture. He had no idea that she had graduated summa cum laude from Wharton, with a degree in finance, that she could speak 3 languages fluently, or that she found solace in reading Russian literature in its original text late at night when the cavernous penthouse was silent. He never asked. The upcoming Metropolis Charity Gala was the apex of New York's social calendar, an event Alistair considered his personal stage. This year, the Blackwood Industries name was the lead sponsor. His attendance was non-negotiable, and to his profound irritation, so was his wife's. Board members, particularly the older, more traditional ones from the Vance side, had been making comments about her absence at previous functions. It looked bad. It looked to be specific, like there was trouble in the perfect billionaire's marriage. He brought it up one evening, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of scotch in his hand. "The gala is on the 1st of next month. You'll be coming with me." Eleanor looked up from her book, her expression unreadable. "Oh, I wasn't aware." "Well, you are now," he said sharply. "My PR team thinks it's imperative we present a united front." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "I've had my assistant contact a stylist. Her name is Celine. She'll be here tomorrow at 10. For the love of God, listen to her. Don't argue. Just let her turn you into something presentable." He didn't see the flicker of pain in her hazel eyes. Or perhaps he did, and simply didn't care. To him, this was a problem to be managed. His plain wife needed to be polished up like a dull piece of silver before she could be put on display. "Of course, Alistair," she said, her voice a soft whisper that was easily swallowed by the vastness of the room. He gave a curt nod, satisfied. He drained his scotch and walked out of the room without another word, leaving her alone with the city lights and the weight of his casual disdain. Eleanor closed her book, the words on the page blurring. She walked to the window, looking down at the endless stream of bright, bustling lights. Everyone down there was living a life full of choices and feelings and heartbreaks and joys. She was up here higher than all of them, in a silent, sterile palace, more isolated than any of them could ever imagine. For 3 years, she had endured. For 3 years, she had made herself small and invisible, hoping that if she didn't draw attention, she could at least find peace. But his demand that she be made presentable was not just an insult. It was a command to be a dollar prop on his arm for one night. He didn't want her. He wanted a sanitized, approved version of her. And as she stared at her faint reflection in the glass, a quiet, cold resolve began to form in the depths of her heart. He wanted something presentable. Fine, he would get it. But it wouldn't be on his terms. It would be on hers. The stylist Celine arrived precisely at 10 the next morning. She was a chic, bird-like woman, with a severe black bob and an air of professional impatience. She assessed Eleanor with a critical eye, walking a slow circle around her, as if inspecting a piece of unremarkable livestock. "Well," Celine began, her French accent sharp, "we have a canvas, a very blank canvas." She gestured for her assistants to bring in racks of glittering gowns in jewel tones, fabrics that shimmered and flowed like liquid metal. For hours, Eleanor was poked, prodded, and pushed into dresses that felt like costumes. Each one was a testament to Alistair's taste, loud, expensive, and designed to scream trophy. There was a crimson dress with a plunging neckline, a gold sequined number that was blindingly bright, and a sapphire blue gown that felt heavy and suffocating. "Mr. Blackwood specified he wants something that makes a statement," Celine said, yanking a zipper. "He wants you to look vibrant." Eleanor knew what he meant. He wanted her to look like the women he was usually seen with, models and actresses who were as dazzling and disposable as champagne flutes. She felt like an imposter in her own skin, the beautiful clothes only serving to highlight how much she wasn't the woman who was supposed to wear them. Later that week, the final straw landed. It wasn't a direct blow, but a glancing one, overheard, and all the more painful for it. Alistair was hosting an informal business dinner in their private dining room. Eleanor, as usual, had made herself scarce, retreating to the library that adjoined the space. The heavy oak doors were nearly closed, but a small gap remained, and the voices lubricated by expensive wine carried. She heard the booming laugh of Julian Croft, Alistair's primary business rival. Croft was everything Alistair was, but with a veneer of old money charm that Alistair's new money aggression could never replicate. Their rivalry was legendary in New York's financial circles. "I have to say, Alistair," Croft's smooth voice drifted through the door, "you've played the long game brilliantly. Locking down Vance Farmer was a masterstroke. Pity about the attachments." Alistair's friends chuckled. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She knew they were talking about her. "She's a means to an end, Julian. Nothing more." Alistair's voice was slick with condescension. He was performing for his audience. "The agreement stands. The woman is useful for maintaining the family connection with the board. But let's be honest, she's an eyesore. An absolute zero in the charisma department. Keeping her out of the spotlight is a full-time job." Someone else chimed in. "Come on, Alistair. You could have at least married one with a bit of spark." "The packaging was irrelevant," Alistair shot back, and the finality in his tone was like a slap. "I bought the company, not the wrapping paper. As long as she stays quiet and doesn't embarrass me, she's fulfilling her side of the bargain." The laughter that followed was a physical blow. Eleanor shrank back from the door, her hands pressed against her mouth to stifle a gasp. An eyesore. The wrapping paper. He hadn't just said it to her in a moment of anger. He had said it to his rival, to his friends, as a point of pride. He was boasting about how little she meant to him. In that moment, something inside her didn't just break. It shattered, and the pieces began to reassemble themselves into something new, something hard and sharp. The quiet acceptance she had cultivated for 3 years evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear fury. She had been a ghost in his house, a footnote in his life, a contractual obligation he barely tolerated. No more. She backed away from the door silently, her movements graceful and sure. She went to her bedroom, the one at the opposite end of the penthouse from Alistair's, and sat at her antique writing desk. She unlocked a small hidden drawer and pulled out a worn leather-bound address book. It had belonged to her mother, a woman who before her illness had been a force of nature, brilliant, stylish, and unapologetically herself. Eleanor flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing the elegant, faded script, until she found the name she was looking for. Isabella Rossi, Rome. Isabella had been her mother's closest confidant, a legendary figure whispered about in the highest echelons of European society. She wasn't just a stylist. She was a sculptor of personas, an artist who worked not in clay or stone, but in confidence, posture, and presence. She had retired years ago, disappearing from the public eye to live a secluded life in Italy, refusing all clients. Eleanor picked up her phone. She didn't hesitate. She knew it was a long shot, but the fire Alistair had just ignited in her gut was burning too brightly to be ignored. She would not be presentable. She would not be a doll dressed by his stylist. She would be a masterpiece of her own making. The phone rang for a long time before a husky, accented voice answered. Pronto. Eleanor took a deep breath, the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Isabella, she said, her voice steady and clear, devoid of its usual whisper. This is Eleanor Vance. I'm Catherine Vance's daughter. I need your help. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Eleanor could hear the faint sound of cicadas, a world away from the sterile quiet of her penthouse. Catherine's girl. Isabella Rossi's voice was a low, smoky rasp, like aged whiskey. I haven't heard that name in years. I am retired, Cara. I know, Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength. I wouldn't call if it weren't important. It's not about a dress. It's about... And resurrection. Another pause. Isabella was intrigued. Resurrection. That is a very big word. He called me wrapping paper. Eleanor said the words tasting like ash. He said I was an eyesore he had to hide. He's going to parade me out at the Metropolis Gala, and he expects me to be his quiet, plain little accessory. I refuse. The cicadas buzzed. Then a low chuckle rumbled through the phone. Ah, a man. It is always a man. Your mother, she would have burned his entire world to the ground for saying such a thing. You have her fire in you, I think. It is just sleeping. Very well, little bird. Let's see if we can teach you how to roar. I will be in New York in 2 days. Cancel this, Celine. We have work to do. The line went dead. Eleanor felt a jolt of pure adrenaline. The game had just changed. The next day she dismissed a bewildered Celine, telling her simply that her services were no longer required. She then informed Alistair that she would be handling her own arrangements for the gala. He barely looked up from his desk. Fine, just don't show up in one of your grey cardigans. I'll be mortified enough as it is. He was so secure in his perception of her that he couldn't fathom her doing anything of consequence. His dismissal was the perfect cover. Isabella Rossi was not what Eleanor expected. She wasn't a whirlwind of air kisses and fashion jargon. She was a woman in her late 60s with piercing dark eyes, a mane of silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, and an aura of absolute authority. She arrived at the service entrance with a single suitcase and surveyed the penthouse with a look of profound disdain. "This place has no soul," she declared. "It is a bank vault with a view. No wonder you are hiding." Their work began not in a closet, but in Eleanor's mind. For the first few days, they didn't look at a single item of clothing. They talked. Isabella had Eleanor tell her everything about her childhood, her love for numbers and literature, her forgotten ambitions, the slow, crushing weight of her marriage. Isabella listened, her gaze never wavering, dissecting every word, every hesitation. "You have made yourself invisible as a shield," Isabella concluded one afternoon as they sat in the rarely used sunroom. "You think if they cannot see you, they cannot hurt you. But a shield can also be a cage, Eleanor. You have locked yourself inside." The training was rigorous and holistic. Isabella was a drill sergeant in Dior. They started with posture. Shoulders back. Your ancestors were not invertebrates tall. Walk as if you own the ground beneath you, not as if you are apologizing for taking up space. Eleanor spent hours walking back and forth in the long hallway, a stack of books on her head, until her tentative shuffle transformed into a graceful, confident stride. Next came her voice. Isabella made her read poetry aloud, projecting from her diaphragm. "Your voice is a whisper. A whisper is for secrets and prayers, not for the boardroom or the ballroom. Speak as if you expect to be heard." Her soft murmurs slowly gained timbre and strength, becoming measured and clear. Isabella also scrutinized her habits. "Stop hiding behind your hair. Stop looking at the floor. Eye contact is not a challenge. It is a conversation. Let them see the intelligence in your eyes. It will frighten the weak and impress the strong." While Isabella was remodeling her presence, Eleanor was secretly rebuilding her independence. Years ago, she had inherited a modest but respectable stock portfolio from her grandmother. Alistair, after a cursory glance, had dismissed it as pocket money and forgotten all about it. But Eleanor, with her Wharton education and an untapped, brilliant financial mind, had been managing it meticulously. In the privacy of her study late at night, she wasn't just reading Tolstoy. She was analyzing market trends, making daring, calculated investments in tech startups and emerging biotech firms. Her pocket money had quietly grown into a substantial fortune, a secret nest egg that gave her a burgeoning sense of power. It was her escape plan long before she knew she was planning an escape. Finally, a week before the gala, Isabella addressed the wrapping paper. She didn't bring in racks of dresses. Instead, she and Eleanor collaborated. They didn't look at trends, they looked for a statement. "This is not about being beautiful," Isabella explained, sketching designs in a notebook. "Alistair is surrounded by beauty. It is common. It is cheap. This is about being unforgettable. We will create an enigma. When you walk into that room, they should not say, 'She is beautiful.' They should say, 'Who is that?'" They commissioned a gown from a reclusive avant-garde designer in Antwerp, whose work was closer to art than fashion. It was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that seemed to drink the light, structured with architectural precision, but flowing with an ethereal grace. It was elegant, powerful, and utterly unique. It was a dress that did not wear the woman. The woman had to inhabit it. The physical transformation was the final piece. A top hairstylist sworn to secrecy was flown in from Paris. He cut her mousy brown hair, layered it to frame her face, and dyed it a rich, warm chestnut with subtle glints of auburn. A makeup artist, a legend in the editorial world, showed her how to accentuate her high cheekbones and define her large, intelligent hazel eyes, making them the arresting focal point of her face. On the afternoon of the gala, Eleanor looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was a stranger, but also, paradoxically, the most honest version of herself she had ever seen. The plainness was gone, stripped away to reveal the strength that had been there all along. The fear was gone, replaced by a calm, cool determination. Isabella stood behind her, a rare, proud smile on her face. "There you are, Cara," she said softly. "I was wondering when you would show up." Eleanor smiled back, a true, confident smile that reached her eyes. "Alistair is expecting a wallflower," she said, her voice low and resonant. "He's about to get a forest fire." The Metropolis Charity Gala was an exercise in ostentatious grandeur. The entrance to the Museum of Modern Art was a river of flashing camera bulbs and velvet ropes. Luxury cars pulled up one after another, depositing the city's elite onto a red carpet that snaked past a throng of reporters and onlookers. Alistair Blackwood arrived early and alone. He thrived in this environment, moving through the crowd with the predatory grace of a shark. He wore a custom Brioni tuxedo, the dark fabric a perfect foil for his ruthless ambition. He glad-handed politicians, exchanged barbed pleasantries with business rivals, and posed for the cameras with an easy, practiced smile. He was in his element. Several people asked about his wife. "Where's Eleanor tonight, Alistair?" asked a portly banking CEO. Alistair gave a theatrical, dismissive sigh. "Oh, you know Eleanor. She's probably still deciding which shade of beige to wear. She'll be along. Don't worry, I've had her thoroughly. Styled. She might even be recognizable tonight." He winked, and the men around him shared a knowing chuckle. He felt a familiar pang of irritation. He just hoped she wouldn't do anything to actively embarrass him. He secured a glass of champagne and positioned himself near the grand staircase, the main entry point to the ballroom where he could hold court. He was deep in a conversation with Julian Croft. Their talk, a polite dance of veiled insults and power plays, when a sudden hush fell over the usually clamorous foyer. It wasn't an abrupt silence, but a spreading wave of quiet, as conversations faltered and heads began to turn one by one toward the entrance. A ripple of whispers followed. Alistair, annoyed by the interruption, glanced impatiently toward the staircase. And then he saw her. For a moment his brain simply refused to process the image. He saw a woman descending the grand marble staircase, and his first thought was that she must be a movie star, or perhaps European royalty he hadn't been briefed on. She moved with a liquid grace, her hand gliding lightly over the balustrade. The gown, a breathtaking creation of midnight blue silk, seemed to absorb the light around her, creating an aura of mystery and power. It wasn't revealing yet. It clung to a figure that was surprisingly slender and strong. Her rich chestnut hair caught the light, framing a face with sculpted cheekbones and a determined yet serene expression. But it was her eyes that held the room captive. They were large, intelligent, and scanning the crowd with an unhurried, confident gaze. There was no timidity, no apology in them. They held a silent, formidable power. Alistair felt a strange, unfamiliar tightening in his chest. He squinted slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. There was something about the line of her jaw, the shape of her eyes. Julian Croft, standing beside him, let out a low whistle. "My God," he murmured, his usual cynical mask falling away for a second. "Now that is a woman. Who is she?" The woman reached the bottom of the staircase. The cameras, which had been focused on a famous actress, swung toward her in a frantic, unified motion, the sound of shutters clicking like a hailstorm. She didn't flinch. She didn't pose. She simply paused, her eyes continuing their calm survey of the room. And then her gaze landed on Alistair. She held his eyes for a single, charged second. A ghost of a smile, enigmatic and cool, touched her lips. It was in that smile that Alistair's world tilted on its axis. The recognition crashed into him with the force of a physical blow. The air left his lungs. The champagne flute in his hand felt suddenly heavy, alien. It was Eleanor. It was his wife. His plain, invisible, beige wife. But it couldn't be. The woman standing before him was a goddess, a queen. She carried herself with an authority he had never seen. The mousy hair was gone, the dowdy clothes were gone, the downcast eyes and the apologetic posture were gone. Every trace of the woman he had so casually mocked and dismissed had been annihilated. In her place stood this breathtaking stranger who wore his wife's face. "Alistair, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Julian Croft said, a note of amusement in his voice. He followed Alistair's stunned gaze, and his eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Wait a minute, is that Eleanor?" Alistair couldn't answer. He was completely, utterly speechless. His mouth was dry, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and a strange, terrifying new emotion, awe. He watched frozen as several of the city's most powerful men he had been trying to impress all night, began to move toward her. Their expressions a mixture of admiration and intense curiosity. She greeted them with a quiet nod and a warm yet reserved smile. Her voice when she spoke was not the whisper he was used to, but a low, melodious tone that carried easily. He had wanted her to be presentable. He had wanted her to be an accessory. But this was not an accessory. This was a supernova. And she hadn't just entered the room. She had taken it. The rest of the evening unfolded like a fever dream for Alistair. He felt as though he had been relegated to the role of a spectator at his own event, watching a drama he didn't understand, starring a woman he thought he knew. He saw his wife, this new, unbelievable Eleanor, move through the gala's glittering crowd, not with the timid uncertainty he expected, but with the poise of a seasoned diplomat. Before he could recover from his initial shock and cross the floor to her. She was intercepted by Julian Croft. Alistair watched his jaw tight as his chief rival took Eleanor's hand, bowing slightly to kiss her knuckles in a gesture of old-world gallantry. "Eleanor," Julian said, his voice laced with genuine admiration. "I must confess I almost didn't recognize you. You are absolutely magnificent." Alistair expected Eleanor to blush, to stammer, to shrink under the attention. Instead, she inclined her head gracefully. "Thank you, Julian. It's amazing what a change in perspective can do." Her reply was smooth, witty, and held a subtle double meaning that was clearly not lost on Croft, who laughed in appreciation. Alistair started towards them, a possessive, primal instinct kicking in. This was his wife. What was Croft doing? But as he approached, Eleanor turned to greet Marcus Thorne, the notoriously reclusive tech billionaire. Alistair had been trying to get a meeting with Thorne for months. Now here was his wife talking to him as if they were old friends. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice clear and calm. "I was fascinated by your company's recent acquisition of the AI logistics firm Omnicorp. Their predictive modeling is revolutionary, but I imagine the real challenge will be integrating their volatile code base with your existing infrastructure." Thorne, a man who famously despised small talk, looked at her with genuine surprise and interest. "You follow AI logistics. I follow smart investments," Eleanor replied smoothly. "And that was one of the smartest I've seen all year." Alistair stopped dead in his tracks. He had no idea she even knew what AI logistics were. He watched dumbfounded as she and Thorne engaged in an animated technical conversation, Thorne nodding enthusiastically. The power brokers and socialites around them were drawn into her orbit, not just by her stunning appearance, but by the palpable intelligence and confidence she radiated. He felt a hot surge of something ugly and unfamiliar jealousy. It was quickly followed by an even more unsettling feeling he was irrelevant to her. She wasn't looking for him, didn't seem to need his validation or his presence. She was building her own connections, commanding her own spotlight. Finally, he managed to corner her near the terrace. "Eleanor," he said, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. "What is all this? What did you do to yourself?" She turned to face him, her hazel eyes cool and direct. The look in them was not of a wife greeting her husband, but of a stranger assessing an obstacle. "I decided to wear something other than beige, Alistair. I thought you'd be pleased." "Pleased? This is a costume. A ridiculous stunt," he hissed, trying to regain control. He reached for her arm, his old habit of physically directing her kicking in. She moved back half a step, just enough to make his hand fall into empty space. The rejection was subtle, but absolute. "Is it?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Or is it possible that the woman you've been living with for 3 years was the costume, and this is the first time you're seeing the real me?" He was floored. He had no response. He was used to her complaints, her silence. This cool, articulate defiance was completely disarming. "People are staring," he grumbled, trying a different tactic. "You're making a scene." "Am I?" She glanced around the ballroom. "The only person I see making a scene, Alistair, is you. Everyone else seems to be having a lovely time." She gave him another one of those small, enigmatic smiles. "Now, if you'll excuse me, the curator of the Guggenheim wants to discuss a potential endowment. I believe he's a friend of my father's." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone and exposed. The Emperor had no clothes, and for the first time in his life, Alistair Blackwood felt foolish. He had spent years mocking the quiet woman by his side, all while a queen lay dormant. Tonight she had awakened, and in doing so, she had completely rewritten the rules of their world. He was no longer the sun around which she orbited. He was just another planet, suddenly knocked off his axis, watching her blaze her own path across the sky. The fear that had been a spark was now a raging fire. He hadn't just underestimated her. He had lost something he never even knew he had. The gala was a public execution of Alistair's ego. The following days were the slow, agonizing post-mortem. The city was buzzing, but not about him or his company's sponsorship. They were buzzing about Eleanor Blackwood. The society pages, which had never once featured her, were now filled with breathless descriptions of the mystery woman who had captivated the Metropolis Gala. Photos of her were everywhere, cool, poised, and devastatingly elegant. They called her transformation miraculous, stunning, the debut of the decade. For Alistair, each headline was another twist of the knife. He returned to the penthouse after the gala expecting. He didn't know what. A confrontation. An explanation. Instead, he found nothing. Eleanor's room was quiet. The door closed. The next morning, she was gone before he woke. A brief, formal note was left on the kitchen's marble island. "I will be staying at my mother's old city apartment for a while. My assistant will coordinate with yours if anything is required." The cold fury that rose in him was a defense mechanism against the deeper, more terrifying feeling of utter confusion. This was not the woman he married. This was not the deal he'd made. He had to understand. He treated the problem like any business threat. He launched an investigation. His first call was to David Chen, his discreet and ruthlessly efficient head of security. "I want to know everything Eleanor has been doing for the past 6 months, Alistair ordered, pacing his office high above the city. "Every meeting, every phone call, every credit card transaction. I want to know who was behind this circus." David, a man accustomed to digging up corporate espionage secrets and vetting billion-dollar deals, was momentarily taken aback. "Sir, on Mrs. Blackwood." "You heard me, David. Everything. And I want the name of the stylist who created that dress." The first report landed on his desk within 48 hours, and it only deepened the mystery. There was no stylist on record. The gown had been commissioned directly from a designer in Antwerp, paid for from a private bank account Alistair didn't recognize. The hair and makeup artists were freelancers who had signed ironclad NDAs, but one name appeared with intriguing frequency: Isabella Rossi, the legendary image consultant who had vanished from public life a decade ago. Phone records showed multiple calls between Eleanor and a private number in Rome, followed by flight records showing Isabella arriving in New York 3 weeks before the gala. Alistair stared at the name. Isabella Rossi wasn't a stylist you hired. She was a kingmaker, a woman who only worked with world leaders and cultural icons. How in God's name did Eleanor even get a meeting with her? The financial report was even more shocking. David had managed to trace the bank account the gown was paid from. It was part of a private brokerage account under Eleanor's maiden name, Vance, an account Alistair had dismissed years ago. He pulled up the portfolio, his access as her husband, giving him the authority he needed, and his breath hitched. It wasn't pocket money. It was a fortune. The initial inheritance of a few million had been cultivated with breathtaking skill. She had invested early in obscure tech firms that had since exploded. She had shorted a failing retail giant months before its public collapse. She had diversified into green energy and pharmaceuticals with the foresight of a seasoned Wall Street predator. Her portfolio had grown exponentially now, rivaling the net worth of some of the men he considered his peers. She was in her own right independently and staggerably wealthy. He felt a wave of vertigo. He had been calling her a bookkeeper while she was quietly playing the market like a virtuoso. He had lectured her about his unlimited black card while she was amassing a fortune he hadn't even known existed. The power dynamic he had taken for granted was a complete fiction. She didn't need him. She hadn't needed him for a very long time. Driven by a new, desperate need for answers, Alistair did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He investigated her past. He called a contact. He had an old-school private investigator named Finn, and asked him to dig into the Vance family, specifically into Eleanor's life before their marriage. The story Finn pieced together was a quiet tragedy. The Vances had once been more than just wealthy. They were socially prominent. But when Eleanor was in her late teens, her father had been embroiled in a nasty, high-profile insider trading scandal. Though he was eventually exonerated, the media frenzy was merciless. They hounded the family with paparazzi camping outside their estate. A particularly aggressive photographer had caused a car accident that badly injured her mother, Catherine, an injury from which she never fully recovered, leading to a reliance on the painkillers that would eventually contribute to her early death. The trauma had changed Eleanor profoundly. She had been bright, vibrant, and on the cusp of a brilliant career. But the predatory nature of the public eye, the way their family was torn apart for sport, had driven her into hiding. Her plainness, her quietness, her invisibility. It wasn't her nature. It was a fortress. She had deliberately built a shell around herself, a defense mechanism to ensure no one would ever look at her, judge her, or hurt her again. Alistair put the phone down, the investigator's words echoing in the silent office. He felt a profound, gut-wrenching shame. He hadn't just mocked her for being plain. He had mocked her for her armor. He had belittled the very walls she had built to protect herself from the kind of brutal public world he reveled in. He had been the monster she was hiding from, and he had been living in her house. His phone buzzed. It was an alert from his legal department. Julian Croft's company, Croft Consolidated, had just submitted a formal proposal for a joint venture. It wasn't addressed to Blackwood Industries. It was a multi-billion-dollar green energy initiative, and the proposal was addressed directly to Ms. Eleanor Vance, CEO of EV Capital, the official name of her private investment firm. Croft hadn't just admired her at the gala. He had recognized her power, and now he was treating her as an equal, a formidable player in a game Alistair thought he owned. The last piece of his superiority crumbled into dust. Armed with the devastating truth of his own ignorance, Alistair knew he couldn't let this play out through assistants and lawyers. He drove himself to the address on Eleanor's note, a classic, elegant brownstone in the West Village that felt a world away from the cold modernity of their penthouse. It felt like her understated solid and possessing a quiet, hidden strength. She opened the door herself. She was not wearing a gown or expertly applied makeup. She was in simple black trousers and a soft cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back loosely. Yet the timid woman was gone forever. The confidence she had worn at the gala was still there now, a quiet, unshakable core of her being. She looked at him not with anger, but with a calm, appraising distance. "Alistair," she said, her voice even. "I wasn't expecting you." "Can I come in?" he asked. The words felt foreign, humble. He had never asked for permission to enter a room in his own home. She hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. The apartment was filled with books, warm wood, and comfortable furniture. It was a home, not a showroom. It was her. He didn't know where to start. The arrogance that had been his default setting for his entire life had deserted him. "The gala," he began, his voice hoarse. "Eleanor, You were speechless," she finished for him, a wry, sad smile on her lips. "That was the point. For one night, I wanted you to see me. To really see me." "I was a fool," he said, the admission costing him more than any failed business deal ever had. "A cruel, blind fool. I read the reports, Eleanor, about your finances, about your family, about what happened to your mother." Her calm expression faltered for a moment, a flicker of old pain in her eyes. "You had me investigated." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "I had to understand," he pleaded, taking a step closer. "I had to know who the woman I married really was. The things I said to you, the way I treated you. I called your shield a weakness because I was too arrogant to see it for what it was. I'm so sorry." The apology hung in the air between them. It was genuine, wrenched from a place of profound shame. Eleanor listened, her gaze steady. She walked over to a small mahogany desk and picked up a thick manila envelope. She held it out to him. "I'm sorry too, Alistair," she said softly. "I'm sorry I allowed myself to be invisible for so long. I'm sorry I let my fear dictate my life. I'm sorry that our marriage was nothing more than a cage for both of us." He took the envelope. His fingers felt numb as he opened the flap and saw the legal letterhead. Divorce papers. His heart plummeted. "No," he whispered. "Eleanor, don't. I see you now. I swear to God I see you. Let's start over. Let me get to know the real you. The woman who can captivate a ballroom and outsmart Wall Street. Let me earn a place in your life." She shook her head, not with malice, but with a gentle finality. "This isn't a punishment, Alistair, and it's not a negotiating tactic. It's a statement. I am no longer the woman who signed that marriage contract. That Eleanor Vance is gone. I spent 3 years in your shadow, and I'm finally ready to stand in my own sun." He looked at the papers, then back at her face, truly seeing the intelligence, strength, and resilience etched there. He had possessed a diamond and had treated it like a common stone, only realizing its value when it was no longer his. The irony was crushing. The master of acquisitions had failed the most important merger of his life. "Is there no chance?" he asked, his voice cracking with a vulnerability that shocked them both. "The old me would have been afraid to leave," she said, her voice filled with a newfound peace. "The new me is afraid not to. I have a business to run. Julian Croft just proposed a very interesting joint venture." She allowed a small, confident smile. "I have a life to build. My own life." She didn't ask him to leave, but he knew it was time to go. He stood there for a moment longer, the divorce papers a dead weight in his hand, memorizing the face of the incredible woman he had so carelessly thrown away. He had wanted to leave her speechless, but in the end, she had been the one to silence him, not with address, but with her quiet, unassailable strength. He walked out of her home and back into the city, a city that suddenly felt like it belonged more to her than to him. The story wasn't over. He knew that. But for the first time, he was not the one writing it. Eleanor Vance Blackwood. No. Eleanor Vance was holding the pen, and her first chapter was just beginning. 6 months passed. The seasons in New York turned, but the shift in the city's power structure was more dramatic than the changing leaves in Central Park. The name Blackwood still commanded respect in boardrooms, but the name Vance now elicited something more potent intrigue. Eleanor did not move back into the gilded cage on Park Avenue. The divorce was finalized with a quiet efficiency that was characteristic of her new life. There were no messy tabloid battles or public recriminations. Eleanor's terms were simple. She wanted nothing from Alistair's fortune. She wanted only a clean separation, leaving her free to continue building her own. This act, more than anything else, cemented her status as a figure of immense and independent strength in the eyes of the public and the financial world. Her firm EV Capital moved into a sleek office in the newly developed Hudson Yards, a space of light glass and forward-thinking design. It was the architectural opposite of Alistair's opulent, heavy penthouse. Here, she thrived. The green energy venture with Julian Croft, dubbed Helios, was a resounding success. They were acquiring land-breaking ground and attracting investors who were drawn not only to the project's profitability, but to Eleanor's formidable reputation for meticulous research and ethical investing. Her partnership with Julian was one of deep intellectual respect. He was a shrewd businessman, but he found himself consistently impressed by her ability to see angles he had missed, to calculate risks with a calm precision that bordered on prophetic. Their meetings were a rapid-fire exchange of ideas, data, and strategy. Helios is stable, but we need to diversify our Q4 acquisitions, Eleanor stated one afternoon, standing before a digital chart in the conference room. The geopolitical climate is too unstable to rely solely on solar. I'm looking at a company in Finland, specializing in geothermal capture. Their tech is 10 years ahead of the curve. Julian leaned back in his chair, a genuinely impressed smile on his face. Finland. Of course. While everyone else is looking at the desert, you're looking under the ice. You never cease to amaze me, Eleanor. It's just about seeing the whole board, Julian, she replied, her confidence natural and unassuming. There was no flirtation between them, no hint of the romance the gossip columnists desperately wanted to invent. Theirs was a connection forged in the crucible of ambition and mutual brilliance. It was, in its own way, more intimate and far more powerful than a simple romance. Meanwhile, Alistair Blackwood was living in the echo of his former life. The sprawling penthouse, once a symbol of his dominion, now felt like a mausoleum. The silence was immense. He had tried to fill it at first, hosting parties and bringing home the kind of beautiful, vapid women he had once preferred. But he found their conversation empty, their laughter grating. They were not her. They lacked the depth, the hidden fire, the quiet intelligence he had been blind to for so long and now craved with a desperate ache. He saw her, of course. It was impossible not to. He saw her on the cover of Forbes, profiled as the quiet titan of Wall Street. He saw paparazzi photos of her leaving a conference in Geneva, looking effortlessly chic in a tailored pantsuit. Her expression focused and serene. He saw her being interviewed on financial news networks, speaking with an eloquence and authority that made his heart clench with a mixture of pride and profound loss. One evening he was watching from his car stuck in traffic on Fifth Avenue. A digital billboard above him lit up. It was an ad for the Helios initiative. It showed a pristine image of a wind farm at sunrise, and across the bottom, the corporate logos Croft Consolidated and EV Capital. Her name illuminated 20 feet high. His rival and his ex-wife building the future together. He finally understood. He had spent his life acquiring things, companies, buildings, assets. He had treated Eleanor like his ultimate acquisition, and in his arrogance, he had never bothered to look inside the wrapping paper. He had owned a treasure and let it slip through his fingers because he was too foolish to recognize its worth. His phone buzzed. It was his father. "Alistair," the old man's gruff voice said, "I see your ex-wife is making waves. Perhaps you should have paid more attention to what you had." The line went dead. The criticism from the one man whose approval he'd always sought was the final crushing blow. Alistair looked from the billboard, from her name in lights, to his own reflection in the polished window of his limousine. He saw a man who had everything and nothing. He had the money, the power, the skyline. But he was utterly, completely alone. Miles away in her own office, Eleanor stood by the window looking out at the same city. She didn't see a collection of buildings he owned. She saw a network of opportunities, a future she was building on her own terms. The past 3 years had been a quiet, painful winter. But now it was spring, and everything was beginning to grow. She took a sip of her tea, a small, genuine smile on her face, and turned back to her work. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city. But in her world, it felt like the dawn. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the most to say, and that true strength isn't about the noise you make, but the changes you inspire. She transformed not just her appearance, but her destiny, proving that self-worth is the most breathtaking accessory of all. She didn't need a prince to save her. She just needed to remember that she was always a queen. If her journey from being a ghost in a gilded cage to the master of her own empire moved you, please let us know by hitting that like button. What part of her transformation did you find most powerful? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And for more unforgettable stories of resilience and redemption, don't forget to share this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring these incredible narratives to light. Thank you for listening. The air in the 50th floor boardroom was worth more than the oxygen on the street, but it was suffocating. At the head of the polished mahogany table sat Brennan Ashford, heir to a billion-dollar tech empire, and beside him his mistress Katrina Monroe, her hand resting possessively on his. They were there to carve up a king's fortune. Across from them, the family lawyer looked on with a stony expression as Brennan spoke his words dripping with venom for his absent pregnant wife. He was painting her as a villain, a gold digger, a woman about to be written out of history. But history, like a loaded gun, was waiting just outside the door. And the woman he was destroying was about to walk in and pull the trigger. The law offices of Cole and Associates occupied the 3 highest floors of the One Vanderbilt Tower, a steel and glass needle piercing the Manhattan skyline. The view from the main conference room was a god's-eye panorama of the city, but no one was looking at it. All eyes were on the man at the head of the table, Brennan Ashford. He had the kind of casual, expensive confidence that came from a lifetime of never hearing the word no. His suit was Tom Ford, his watch a Patek Philippe, and his grief, it seemed, was entirely custom-made for the occasion. His father, Walter Ashford, the titan behind Ashford Innovations, had been buried 2 days ago. Today was the reading of the will, the formal transfer of power, and Brennan was acting less like a grieving son and more like a king ascending his throne. To his right sat his younger sister, Phoebe Ashford, a woman whose life was a curated collection of charity luncheons and equestrian events. Phoebe seemed perpetually lost, her wide, anxious eyes darting between her brother and the lawyer. She clutched a small, jewel-encrusted handbag like a life raft. To Brennan's left, however, was the real focal point of the room's tension. Katrina Monroe. She was stunning in a severe, sculptural way that contrasted sharply with Brennan's wife. Dressed in a form-fitting black dress that was just a shade too provocative for a somber legal meeting, she projected an aura of triumphant ownership. Her perfectly manicured hand, adorned with a canary diamond that was certainly not from Brennan's wife, rested on his forearm. She was a declaration of war made flesh. At the other end of the long table, Mr. Lawrence Cole Walter Ashford's lawyer for 40 years adjusted his glasses. He was a man made of tweed leather-bound books and quiet disappointment. He had watched Brennan grow from a spoiled boy into a man who wore his father's legacy like a costume, and his expression was one of profound professional neutrality that failed to mask a deep personal weariness. "If we're all present," Mr. Cole began, his voice a dry rustle of paper, "we can proceed. The will of Walter Henry Ashford is quite direct." "Let's get on with it, Lawrence," Brennan said, a dismissive wave of his hand. "We all know what it says. Dad knew who built this company with him, who was ready to take it into the future." He squeezed Katrina's hand pointedly. "And who wasn't?" The jab was aimed squarely at his wife, Gracie Davies. The official story, the one Brennan had been spinning for the last 6 months, was that their marriage had tragically crumbled under the weight of his father's illness. That Gracie, cold and calculating, had shown her true colors when the family needed unity the most. The tabloids, fed by anonymous sources that sounded suspiciously like Brennan's publicist, had hinted at her greed, her emotional distance, her unsuitability as the matriarch of the Ashford dynasty. "Where is Gracie Brennan?" Phoebe whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Shouldn't she be here? She's still your wife. And she's, you know." She gestured vaguely towards her own stomach. Brennan's jaw tightened. Gracie was informed of the time and place. If she chooses not to attend, that is her decision. Frankly, it's for the best. This is a day for family, for those who genuinely cared for my father. He looked at Katrina, his eyes softening with a look of manufactured devotion. Katrina was a great comfort to my father in his final months, a better friend to him than his own daughter-in-law ever was. Katrina offered a small, sad smile to the room. "Walter was a wonderful man. I miss him terribly. I'm just here to support Brennan." Her voice was soft, melodic, and utterly false. She had met Walter Ashford twice, both times at tense charity galas, where the old man had looked right through her. Mr. Cole cleared his throat, a sound like gravel grinding. "The will makes a specific provision for Gracie Ashford, formerly Davies. Her presence is requested but not under the initial articles legally required for the primary reading." He deliberately avoided looking at Katrina. "Shall I begin?" Brennan nodded, leaning back in his chair with the smug satisfaction of a man who had already won. He looked at Katrina, a silent promise passing between them. The empire was his. The money was his. And soon, the woman beside him would be his wife, and the inconvenient one carrying his child would be a footnote, a payoff, a distant and unpleasant memory. The vultures were perched, knives and forks were in hand, and the feast was about to be served. They had no idea they were the ones on the menu. Mr. Cole broke the seal on a thick cream-colored envelope with a quiet crackle that seemed to echo in the silent room. He unfolded the document, the dense legal text, a fortress protecting Walter Ashford's final commands. "I, Walter Henry Ashford," he began, his voice taking on the formal cadence of legal scripture, "being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." Brennan steepled his fingers, a portrait of impatient authority. Katrina sat unnaturally still, her painted-on mask of serene support starting to feel tight around the edges. Only Phoebe fidgeted, twisting a diamond ring on her finger. "To my beloved daughter, Phoebe Ashford." Mr. Cole read, "I bequeath a trust fund in the amount of $50 million to be managed by the Ashford Estate Executor. This trust will provide for your lifetime, ensuring your comfort and security. I also leave you my collection of impressionist art and the summer home in the Hamptons. May it bring you the peace you have always sought." Phoebe let out a shaky breath, a mixture of relief and sorrow. It was a generous, almost dismissive sum, enough to keep her in designer clothes and charity galas for the rest of her life. But it kept her far from the levers of real power. It was a gilded cage, and she was, as always, its willing occupant. "Oh," she whispered, "that's very kind of Daddy." Brennan gave her a patronizing smile. "He always took care of you, Phoebes." The subtext was clear. Now for the important part. Mr. Cole continued, his eyes scanning the page. "To my various household and corporate staff, there are a series of smaller bequests and pensions detailed in Appendix A in gratitude for their years of loyal service." He paused, taking a slow sip of water. The tension in the room ratcheted up a notch. This was it. "Regarding my wife, Gracie Davies Ashford," Mr. Cole said, and Brennan sat bolt upright. Katrina's hand, which had been resting on his, tightened its grip. "Given the recent difficulties in her marriage to my son, I bequeath to her the sum of $10 million, conditional upon the signing of a non-disclosure agreement regarding her time with the Ashford family. This sum is to be considered a final settlement." A wave of triumph washed over Brennan's face. It was perfect, more than enough to look generous, but a pittance compared to the full inheritance. It painted Gracie as a problem being paid off, a nuisance being silenced. He shot a smug look at Katrina, who allowed herself a tiny, victorious smile. $10 million to disappear forever. A bargain. "And now," Mr. Cole said, turning to the final, most crucial page, "the remainder of my estate, including my controlling shares in Ashford Innovations, my personal properties, high liquid assets, and all subsidiary holdings I leave to my only son." He paused, and in that second of silence, Brennan Ashford felt the world solidify beneath his feet. He saw the future spooling out before him. Board meetings where he was the unquestioned authority, magazine covers hailing him as the new visionary of tech, and Katrina draped in diamonds on his arm. "Brennan Michael Ashford," Mr. Cole concluded. "He shall also assume the role of executor of my estate. This is my final wish." The words hung in the air, final and absolute. Brennan let out a long, slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had done it. The old man had come through. All his fears that his father saw his recklessness, his affairs, his fundamental lack of seriousness were unfounded. He stood up his chair, scraping back harshly. He was the king now. "Thank you, Lawrence," he said, his voice thick with emotion he wasn't truly feeling. He turned to the small audience. My father was a great man, a hard man, but he was a builder, and he knew that to build a future, you sometimes have to tear down the past. He looked from Phoebe's tear-streaked face to Katrina's adoring one. He knew this company needed strong, decisive leadership. He knew it needed a vision untethered from hesitation. It was a speech he had rehearsed, a thinly veiled condemnation of his wife, Gracie. Everyone in their circle knew she had a brilliant strategic mind. She had an MBA from Stanford and had been a rising star at a consulting firm before she married him. In the early years, she had been his secret weapon, honing his presentations, refining his ideas. But her careful analytical approach had begun to feel like a criticism to Brennan's ego. He called it hesitation. His father had called it wisdom. And I want to be clear about something. Brennan continued, his voice rising with newfound power. He took Katrina's hand and pulled her to her feet beside him. Katrina has been my rock through all of this. She stood by me when others were distant. He stroked her cheek. She understands the pressures I face, the vision I have. She is the future of this family, and I will not have her or her role in my life questioned by anyone. He was defending his mistress at the reading of his father's will. It was a brazen, shocking display of disrespect, not only to his marriage, but to his father's memory. Phoebe gasped softly. Mr. Cole's face was a granite mask betraying nothing. Katrina looked up at Brennan, her eyes shining. "Oh, Brennan," she whispered, playing her part to perfection. Brennan nodded resolute. "As my first act as executor, I want the paperwork for Gracie's settlement drawn up immediately. We'll have it couriered over. There's no need to drag this out." "That will not be necessary." The voice was quiet, calm, and clear. It came from the doorway, and it cut through the charged atmosphere of the room like a shard of ice. Every head swiveled towards the grand double doors of the boardroom. Standing there framed by the dark, polished wood was Gracie Davies Ashford. She was not the hysterical, weeping woman Brennan had described to his friends. She was not the defeated, broken creature he had imagined would come crawling for a settlement. She was a vision of unnerving composure. She was 7 months pregnant, the gentle swell of her belly prominent beneath a simple, elegant navy blue dress. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and her face, though pale, was serene. Her eyes, a deep, intelligent grey, held no tears, only a profound and steady calm that was far more terrifying than any rage could have been. She looked like a queen who had come not to plead for her throne, but to reclaim it. In her hand, she held a single large manila envelope, sealed with a distinctive dark green wax stamp. For a moment, the room was utterly still, a tableau of shock. Phoebe's hand flew to her mouth. Katrina's triumphant smile dissolved her face, tightening with a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. She instinctively took a step back from Brennan, as if proximity to him had suddenly become dangerous. Brennan was the first to recover his shock, curdling instantly into fury. "Gracie!" He snarled, his voice a low growl. "What the hell are you doing here? I told you this was for family only." "I am family, Brennan," she replied, her voice even and cool. "I am your wife, and I am the mother of your child, your father's grandchild." She took a step into the room, the doors clicking softly shut behind her. Her presence seemed to shrink the cavernous space, drawing all the energy and attention towards her. "We are in the middle of something important," Brennan snapped, gesturing around the room as if to prove his point. "You're late. We've already concluded the primary reading." "I'm not late," Gracie said, her gaze shifting from her husband to the lawyer at the end of the table. "I'm right on time. Hello, Mr. Cole." Lawrence Cole inclined his head, a flicker of something unreadable in his old eyes. "Gracie, we are glad you could make it." His tone was markedly more respectful than the one he had used with Brennan. Brennan scoffed a harsh, ugly sound. "Glad she could make it. She's here to make a scene, to try and squeeze more money out of this. I should have known." He turned back to Gracie, his face a mask of contempt. "It's over, Jen. The will has been read. You get your 10 million. Now take your little payday and go. Don't embarrass yourself further." He gestured towards Katrina, a possessive and defiant act. "My life is with Katrina now. We're moving forward. You should do the same." Gracie's calm expression didn't waver. She didn't even glance at Katrina, a dismissal more profound than any insult. It was as if the other woman simply didn't exist. Instead, she walked gracefully towards the table, her steps measured and deliberate. She stopped beside an empty chair, the one that had clearly been set for her, and placed the manila envelope on the gleaming mahogany surface. The green wax seal seemed to go under the recessed lighting. "What is that?" Brennan demanded, suspicion lacing his voice. "This," Gracie said, her hand resting lightly on the envelope, "is what I came to deliver. It was entrusted to me by your father 2 weeks before he passed." A nervous energy rippled through the room. Phoebe stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Brennan's bravado faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine uncertainty. "My father was sick, heavily medicated." "Anything he gave you is irrelevant," he blustered. "He was probably delirious. He wasn't in his right mind." "Oh, he was perfectly lucid, Brennan," Gracie said, her voice dropping a little, taking on a note of intimate memory that excluded everyone else. "He was tired, yes, but his mind was as sharp as ever. Sharper, perhaps. He saw things very, very clearly at the end." She pushed the envelope gently across the polished table until it stopped directly in front of Mr. Cole. "Walter asked me to bring this here today. He instructed me to wait until after the initial will was read. He said it was important for everyone to show their true colors first." Her grey eyes finally moved to her husband, and for the first time, a sliver of ice-cold fire was visible within them. "And you, my dear husband, did not disappoint." Mr. Cole picked up the envelope, his long, papery fingers examining the seal. He looked at Brennan, then at Gracie. He knew that seal. It was Walter Ashford's private mark, the one he used for his most confidential and important correspondence. "What does it say, Lawrence?" Brennan demanded, his voice now a little too loud, a little too strained. "It's probably just some sentimental nonsense. A letter." "It does not feel like a letter," Mr. Cole said quietly, testing the weight and stiffness of the envelope. He looked at Gracie. "You are presenting this as a legal document to be entered into the proceedings. I am presenting it as Walter Ashford's final binding directive," Gracie corrected him gently. "He assured me it would clarify his intentions." The word clarify hung in the air, laden with unspoken threat. The gilded cage Brennan had just inherited suddenly felt fragile, its bars made not of gold, but of glass. And Gracie had just brought a hammer. The boardroom had become a pressure cooker. The air, once filled with Brennan's arrogant pronouncements, was now thick with a tense, humming silence. All the power, all the momentum, had shifted from the head of the table to the woman standing quietly by its side. Mr. Cole held the envelope, his expression a careful study in legal impassivity. He ran a thumb over the green wax seal embossed with the distinctive A of the Ashford family crest. "This is indeed Walter's private seal," he confirmed, his voice low and serious. The statement landed like a judge's gavel. It gave the document an immediate, unimpeachable authenticity. Brennan's face was a storm of conflicting emotions, rage, disbelief, and a creeping, snake-like fear. "This is absurd. A theatrical stunt. My father's will has been read. It's done. This is a desperate, last-ditch attempt to contest it by a woman who knows she's been cut out." He turned on Gracie, his voice rising. "What did you do? Jen? Did you bully a sick old man on his deathbed, whisper poison in his ear when he was too weak to fight back?" Gracie met his accusations without flinching. "Your father was many things, Brennan, but weak was never one of them. He knew exactly what he was doing. He also knew you." She let that last sentence hang in the air, a devastatingly simple indictment. "This is irregular," Brennan insisted, turning his appeal to the lawyer. "Lawrence, you can't possibly take this seriously. We proceed with the execution of the will as read. That is the proper legal procedure." "The proper legal procedure, Mr. Cole," countered, his voice as sharp and precise as a scalpel, "is to examine any and all documents purported to be a final testament or codicil of the deceased, especially when presented under such circumstances. To ignore it would be a gross dereliction of my fiduciary duty." He picked up a slender silver letter opener from his desk set. "With the consent of the present parties, I will open this envelope." "I do not consent!" Brennan shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The sharp crack made Phoebe jump. Katrina flinched, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering, replaced by a look of naked greed and fear. Her dream was slipping through her fingers. "Your consent is not required, Brennan," Mr. Cole said flatly. "As the potential executor, you are a party of interest, and therefore cannot unilaterally obstruct the process. Gracie, as the presenter of the document, has given her implicit consent. Phoebe." Phoebe looked from her furious brother to her strangely serene sister-in-law, her face a mess of confusion. I think we should see what Daddy wanted," she stammered. "Whatever it is." "Thank you, Phoebe," Mr. Cole said. He ignored Brennan's sputtering protests and slid the letter opener cleanly under the wax seal. The sound of tearing paper was offensively loud in the quiet room. Brennan was on his feet now, pacing behind his chair like a caged animal. "This is a farce. Whatever is in there is a forgery. Gracie has been planning this for months, ever since she knew I was leaving her." "Be quiet, Brennan," Gracie said, her voice still quiet, but now edged with steel. "For once in your life, listen." Mr. Cole carefully extracted 2 separate documents from the envelope. The first was a multi-page document bound by a blue legal ribbon, clearly a formal codicil. The second was thinner, a single folded sheet of Walter Ashford's personal heavyweight stationery. He unfolded the letter first. His eyes scanned the familiar, spiky handwriting of his old friend and client. He read it silently, his expression unreadable, but the longer he read, the deeper the lines on his forehead seemed to etch themselves. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. "Well," Brennan demanded, "what is it?" "A love letter to his precious daughter-in-law." Mr. Cole looked up not at Brennan, but at Gracie. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, a sign of confirmation passing between them. A silent acknowledgement that the plan Walter had set in motion was now officially underway. He then cleared his throat and addressed the room. "This is a letter from Walter," he announced. It is dated 2 weeks ago. It is signed and his signature is verified by his personal physician, confirming he was of sound mind and not under duress. The letter serves as an explanatory note for the accompanying legal document. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The legal document, he continued, picking up the ribbon-bound papers, is a duly witnessed and notarized codicil to the last will and testament of Walter Henry Ashford. A collective gasp went through the room. A codicil. A legal amendment. The will they had just heard read was not the final word after all. Katrina sank back into her chair, her face ashen. The canary diamond on her finger suddenly looked garish and cheap. A codicil. Brennan repeated, his voice hollow with disbelief. What does it say? Mr. Cole adjusted his glasses, his gaze cold and direct as it landed on Brennan. It says, and I quote from Walter's accompanying letter, "I have recently been forced to acknowledge a profound error in judgment regarding my son's character. An inheritance is not a prize to be won. It is a responsibility to be earned. A legacy is not a toy to be played with, but a trust to be honored." He then picked up the codicil itself. This document fundamentally alters the disposition of the estate as previously outlined. It begins with the invocation of a new clause. He looked directly at Brennan, his eyes seeming to bore right through him. It is entitled Article 7, the Morality and Fidelity Clause. The phrase Morality and Fidelity Clause landed in the center of the room like a grenade. Brennan stared at Mr. Cole, his face slack with a dawning, horrified comprehension. "A what clause?" He stammered, the words catching in his throat. "A morality and fidelity clause." Mr. Cole repeated, his voice devoid of any emotion. He began to read directly from the codicil, the dense legalese a death knell for Brennan's ambitions. "This clause is hereby enacted as a primary condition for the inheritance of any and all controlling interests in Ashford Innovations and the associated liquid assets by my son, Brennan Michael Ashford. The inheritance is contingent upon his demonstrated commitment to the values of the Ashford family name, integrity, loyalty, and discretion." He paused, looking over his glasses at Brennan, who was now pale as a ghost. It continues, "Should Brennan at the time of the reading of this will be engaged in any public or private scandal that brings dishonor to the family, or should he be found to have been demonstrably unfaithful to his marital vows to Gracie Davies Ashford, all bequests made to him in Article 6 of the primary will are rendered null and void." The room was so silent you could hear the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. Katrina made a small, strangled sound. This was about her. This was a direct, posthumous strike from the old man, aimed with surgical precision at her and Brennan's affair. "This is insane," Brennan finally exploded, finding his voice. "He can't do that. It's medieval. You can't disinherit someone for their personal life." "On the contrary," Mr. Cole stated calmly, not looking up from the page. "A testator can place almost any condition on an inheritance so long as it is not illegal or against public policy. And Walter was very thorough. He specifically cites the protection of the company's brand and shareholder value from the potential fallout of reckless personal behavior. It is perfectly legal and perfectly binding." Brennan whirled on Gracie, his eyes wild with accusation. You did this. You poisoned him against me." "I never said a word to him about Katrina," Gracie replied, her voice steady as a rock. "I didn't have to. Walter wasn't blind, Brennan. He was just quiet. He saw the way you looked at her at the last foundation gala. He saw the late-night credit card receipts from hotels I've never been to. He saw the articles your own publicist planted in the gossip columns to lay the groundwork for our divorce. He saw everything. The specificity of her knowledge hit Brennan like a physical blow. She had known. She had known all along and had said nothing, simply watching, waiting. "So what?" Brennan spat, trying to rally. "It's my word against hers." "How can you prove anything? There's no proof right here, right now." He looked around the room, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. He was searching for a loophole, a way out. He had brought Katrina here himself. He had defended her, proclaimed her the future of his family just minutes earlier. He had walked himself with his own breathtaking arrogance directly into his father's trap. "I believe," Mr. Cole said, his voice laced with an almost imperceptible touch of irony, "that your own impassioned speech a few moments ago, defending Ms. Monroe and declaring your intention to build a life with her in the presence of 3 witnesses, would be considered demonstrably unfaithful by any court in this state." Checkmate. The trap had sprung. But Walter Ashford was not finished. The claws was the sword, but the old man had forged a second, even more devastating weapon. Mr. Cole put down the codicil. "This clause effectively voids your inheritance of the company and the bulk of the estate, Brennan. The codicil dictates that in this event, the entire portion bequeathed to you would be placed into a charitable trust, the Walter Ashford Foundation for Ethical Innovation." For a second, it seemed that was the end of it. The company lost the money gone, all of it funneled into a charity. A complete and total disinheritance. Brennan looked crushed, but a part of him almost seemed relieved. If he couldn't have it, at least Gracie couldn't either. But then Mr. Cole picked up the manila envelope again. There was still a document inside. "However," the lawyer said, his voice dropping significantly, "there is a second document. This is not a part of the will. It is a separate, legally binding instrument." He slid out a sheaf of papers stapled together, and bearing the letterhead, not of his law firm, but of a private investment group. "What is that?" Phoebe whispered, her voice barely audible. "This," Mr. Cole announced, "is a private partnership and management transfer agreement for Ashford Innovations executed between Walter Ashford and Gracie Davies Ashford." The second bombshell was more powerful than the first. Brennan stared, his mouth agape. "A partnership? What are you talking about?" "She never worked for the company." "That's where you're wrong," Gracie said softly, speaking for the first time since the revelation. "For the last 18 months, after you started losing interest in the actual work and became more interested in the lifestyle I've been meeting with your father. Secretly." She painted a picture that Brennan could barely comprehend. Late-night calls, weekend meetings at the city library. Walter, disillusioned with his son's lack of vision, had found a willing and brilliant apprentice in his daughter-in-law. He had recognized the strategic mind he had always wished his own son possessed. The Phoenix Project, that AI integration that saved the fourth quarter last year, Gracie said, her eyes locked on Brennan's. "That was my proposal. The pivot to sustainable tech that landed the company on the cover of Wired Walter, and I drafted that plan on my kitchen table. He was mentoring me, Brennan. He was teaching me how to run his company, because he knew he couldn't trust it to you." Mr. Cole held up the final document. "This agreement establishes a new controlling entity for Ashford Innovations. It bypasses the will entirely. Upon Walter's death, his 51% controlling stake in the company was not to be transferred to his estate, but was automatically sold for a nominal sum of $1 to this pre-established entity, an entity for which Gracie Davies Ashford is the sole director and majority shareholder. He let the words sink in. Brennan hadn't just been disinherited. He had been surgically removed. The company wasn't going to charity, it was going to Gracie. The document stipulates the shares are to be held in trust for her and for the natural-born heir of the Ashford lineage, her child, Mr. Cole concluded. Brennan, you are left with the Manhattan penthouse, which was in your name already, and a personal trust fund your grandfather set up for you years ago. It is a substantial amount by any normal standard, but you no longer have any connection to or control over Ashford Innovations. The empire was gone. The throne he had been so eager to claim had just vanished from beneath him, reappearing under the woman he had tried to cast aside. The true papers weren't just a will. They were a corporate coup executed from beyond the grave. And Gracie wasn't just the grieving widow. She was the new CEO. The silence that followed Mr. Cole's final pronouncement was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. For a long, drawn-out moment, Brennan Ashford simply stood there, his face a canvas of utter devastation. The confident, swaggering air had been hollowed out, leaving behind a bewildered, pathetic shell. The crown he had placed on his own head had shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. Then the disbelief gave way to a primal, guttural rage. "No!" The roar was animalistic, echoing off the glass and polished wood of the boardroom. "No, I don't accept this. This is a lie, a conspiracy." He lunged across the table, not at Gracie but at the papers in Mr. Cole's hands. "Let me see that, it's a forgery." She forged it. She tricked him. Mr. Cole, with the surprising quickness of an old man who has dealt with his share of tantrums, pulled the documents back, holding them protectively to his chest. "Brennan, control yourself. These documents are ironclad. They have been authenticated. Walter's signature is on every page, witnessed by an independent counsel and 2 members of his board." Brennan's wild eyes darted around the room, looking for an ally, for anyone who would validate his sense of cosmic injustice. He looked at his sister Phoebe, who was staring at Gracie with a new dawning expression of awe and confusion. No help there. His gaze finally landed on Katrina, the woman he had defended, the woman he had sacrificed an empire for. "Katrina," he pleaded, his voice cracking. Tell them how she manipulated him, how she was never there for him." But Katrina Monroe was a creature of calculated survival. She had hitched her wagon to a stallion and just discovered he was a gelding. The mask of the loving, supportive partner was gone, replaced by a shrewish, panicked fury. "You told me it was yours!" She shrieked, her voice high and sharp. She wasn't looking at Brennan with sympathy, but with the utter contempt of a predator whose prey has just dissolved into dust. "You swore to me. You said your father was an old fool who adored you. You promised me everything. I thought it was—" Brennan yelled back, gesturing helplessly. "He was my father. Some son you are." Katrina shot back, her carefully curated elegance completely gone. She pointed a shaking, red-nailed finger at him. "You lost it all. For what? For her." She turned her venom on Gracie. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Sitting there all smug with your belly." Gracie didn't rise to the bait. She simply looked at Katrina, a flicker of something almost like pity in her eyes. "This was never about you, Katrina. You were just a symptom of the problem, a predictable one." The casual, clinical dismissal was more infuriating to Katrina than any insult. "I loved him," she cried, a last desperate gamble at playing the victim. "You loved the idea of him," Gracie corrected her, her voice soft but firm. You loved the Ashford name, the penthouses, the private jets. You never once asked him about his work, his passions, his fears. You just saw a prize, and you tried to claim it. I can't even be angry at you. It's just what you are. Defeated, exposed, and stripped of her leverage, Katrina grabbed her ridiculously expensive handbag from the floor. "This is a nightmare," she hissed primarily to herself. She shot one last, hate-filled glare at Brennan. "Don't you dare call me!" And with that, she turned and stormed out of the boardroom, her heels clicking an angry staccato on the marble floor of the hallway. The future Mrs. Ashford was gone, her dreams of a billion-dollar lifestyle evaporating with every step. Brennan watched her go, the final pillar of his deluded reality collapsing. He sank into his chair, a broken man, all the fight gone out of him. He stared at his hands on the table, the hands that were supposed to be running a global corporation, now empty. "Why?" he whispered, his question directed at Gracie. "Why would he do this to me? I was his son." For the first time, Gracie's composure softened, a genuine wave of sorrow washing over her features. She walked around the table and stood before her husband. "He did it because you are his son, Brennan," she said, her voice gentle. "He loved you, but he saw you were drowning in ego, in insecurity, in your desperate need to prove you weren't just Walter Ashford's son. He built that company from nothing. It was his life's work, his real child. He couldn't let you destroy it, and he knew you would have." She let out a heavy sigh. "He also did it for our child. He wanted his grandchild to be raised with the values he tried to instill in you: humility, hard work, integrity. He didn't want our baby to grow up in the shadow of your scandals. He did this to protect his legacy and to protect his family. Both of them." She placed a hand on her stomach. "He told me in one of our last conversations that giving you everything you wanted would have been the cruelest thing he could possibly do to you. So he gave you a chance instead, a chance to build something of your own, to become your own man without his shadow." The explanation was not one of vengeance, but of a harsh, painful love. It was a truth more devastating to Brennan than any simple disinheritance. His father hadn't done this out of hate, but out of a profound and utter lack of faith. Mr. Cole cleared his throat, bringing the raw emotional moment back to the business at hand. "Brennan, I think it would be best if you left now. We have a lot of paperwork to get through." He looked at Gracie. "Madam Chairman." The new title hung in the air. Brennan flinched as if he'd been struck. He looked at Gracie. Truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. He didn't see the woman he'd cheated on, but the woman his father had chosen. The true heir. Without another word, he stood up. A man suddenly aged a decade and walked out of the room, leaving his name, his legacy, and his future behind him. The slam of the boardroom door as Brennan departed seemed to suck all the remaining rage out of the room, leaving a vacuum in its wake. The silence that rushed in to fill it was unlike any Gracie had ever experienced. It wasn't empty. It was dense, heavy with the ghosts of shouted words, shattered egos, and the quiet, calculating ghost of Walter Ashford himself, whose final gambit had been a masterpiece of posthumous strategy. The air still held the faint, cloying scent of Katrina's expensive perfume, a cheap fragrance trying and failing to mask the stench of scorched earth greed. An empty water glass stood where Brennan had sat, a single drop of condensation, tracing a path down its side like a tear. For a long moment, the three remaining figures were a tableau of the New World Order. Mr. Cole, the steadfast executor, stood as a bridge between the past and the future. Gracie, the unexpected queen, was the focal point of all the room's energy, and Phoebe, the forgotten princess, was finally seeing the world outside her gilded cage. Phoebe was the first to move, her actions tentative, as if she feared the slightest motion might shatter the fragile new reality. She looked at Gracie, but it was a different kind of look than she had ever given her before. The usual polite, distant gaze of a society sister-in-law was gone, replaced by a raw, bewildered awe. It was the look of someone who had just witnessed a magic trick and was now trying to see the hidden mechanisms behind it. "You knew," Phoebe breathed the words, barely a whisper. It wasn't an accusation, but a statement of profound wonder. "All this time, while Brennan was parading that woman around, while the papers were printing those awful veiled stories, you knew what was coming." Gracie turned from the door, her shoulders slumping just a fraction of an inch, the first sign of the immense strain she had been under. "I knew Brennan was being unfaithful," she corrected softly. "That part was painfully obvious, but I didn't know the full extent of your father's plan. Not until the end." She walked slowly, drawn by instinct, to the massive, floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the sprawling urban kingdom of Manhattan. From 50 floors up, the ceaseless yellow cabs looked like blood cells moving through the city's arteries. A universe of commerce, ambition, and struggle played out below. Walter's universe. And now hers. "He called me to his study about a week before he entered the hospital for the last time," she continued, her voice taking on a distant, reflective quality as she recalled the memory. The room had smelled of old leather lemon polish and the faint, sweet scent of the unlit cigars he kept in a humidor on his desk. He had looked so diminished against the grandeur of his high-backed chair, a lion in winter, his physical strength waning, but the fierce intelligence in his eyes burning brighter than ever. He told me, "A legacy, my dear girl, is like a garden. You can't just hand it to someone who only wants to pick the flowers. You must give it to the one who is willing to tend the soil." He said he'd spent years watching Brennan, and that he saw a man who would burn the garden down just to complain about the ashes. Gracie traced a line on the cool glass with her fingertip. "He apologized to me for Brennan, for the humiliation. He said he saw the daughter he never had in me, someone who understood that power wasn't a prize, but a profound responsibility." Then he showed me the documents. The codicil, the partnership agreement. He made me promise I would see it through. He said I had to wait to let Brennan walk into the trap himself. It was the only way it would be final, the only way the board would understand the necessity of it. She turned back to face Phoebe, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It was the hardest promise I have ever had to make. To smile through family dinners while my heart was breaking to carry his grandchild, while his own son was trying to erase me, to listen to whispers and read gossip and remain silent. It felt like a betrayal every single day. But I owed your father. He saw me. He believed in me when my own husband looked right through me." Phoebe's carefully maintained composure finally crumbled. A sob escaped her lips, and she moved across the room, closing the distance between them. In a gesture that was completely out of character for the usually reserved and image-conscious woman, she wrapped her arms around Gracie in a hug that was both fierce and fragile. "I'm so sorry, Jen." She wept into her sister-in-law's shoulder. "I'm sorry I was so blind. I saw the way Brennan treated you, how he dismissed your ideas. I never stood up to him. No one ever did. I believed the stories because it was easier than confronting him." She pulled back, her mascara-smudged eyes finding Gracie's. "Daddy knew what he was doing. He always did. He put the family in the right hands. Her gaze dropped to Gracie's belly, and a watery, genuine smile broke through her tears. He put his future in the right hands. A real warm smile finally touched Gracie's lips, reaching her tired eyes. "Thank you, Phoebe. That means more than you know." And Cole, who had been quietly and discreetly arranging the documents into neat piles, finally spoke his practical tone, grounding the raw, emotional moment. "Phoebe is right, Gracie. Walter made the correct choice. But it will not be an easy one." He gestured to the papers on the table. "The board of directors is comprised of men who were loyal to your father, yes. But they are also conservative, old-school industrialists. They will see a 30-something woman, his son's estranged wife, no less taking over a billion-dollar legacy. They will be more than skeptical. Some will be hostile. You will have to prove yourself from the very first moment. Are you truly ready for the fight that comes next?" His question was not a challenge, but a final, necessary test. Was she ready for the weight of it all? Gracie took a deep, steadying breath. She looked from Phoebe's hopeful face to Mr. Cole's serious one. She looked at the documents on the table, the instruments of her liberation and her life's new purpose. Then she looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. It was more than a piece of furniture. It was a symbol, carved from dark walnut, upholstered in rich bottle-green leather, worn smooth by decades of Walter Ashford's presence. It was the seat of power. The throne. Brennan had seen it as a prize, a place to sit and be admired. Gracie saw it for what it was, a mantle. A heavy, lonely, and profoundly important responsibility. With a newfound grace and purpose, she walked to the head of the table. She didn't sit. Instead, she stood behind the chair, placing her hands on its solid, carved shoulders. She could feel the faint grain of the wood under her palms, a tangible link to the man who had entrusted her with his life's work. She was no longer just Gracie Davies, the brilliant consultant. She was no longer Gracie Ashford, the wronged wife. She was the guardian of a legacy, the architect of a future, the mother of the heir. She was everything Walter had needed her to be. "Yes, Mr. Cole," she said, and her voice was transformed. The quiet, gentle tone was gone, replaced by a clear, confident command that rang with an authority she hadn't known she possessed. "I am ready." Her eyes met his, and a silent understanding passed between them. The king was dead. A new era had begun. She gave the chair a final resolute touch, a silent promise to its former occupant. "Get the board on a conference call," she ordered, her voice crisp and decisive. "Inform them there has been a change in leadership. They have a new chairman to meet." She paused, a flicker of steel in her eyes. "And we have work to do." And so in the silent aftermath of a corporate earthquake, Gracie Ashford stood not as a victor gloating over the spoils of war, but as a leader stepping into the role she was always meant to have. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was a story about justice. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but about having the patience, the intelligence, and the courage to play the long game. Walter Ashford didn't just leave his company to his daughter-in-law. He left it in the hands of the only person who truly understood its value and had the character to protect it for the next generation. A true legacy isn't what you leave for people. It's what you leave inside them. If this story of justice resonated with you, and if you believe that character is the ultimate inheritance, then let us know in the comments. Drop a Justice for Jen below to show your support. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to see the underdog win and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories, where the truth always finds its light. Thank you for listening.